Okay.
Hi, this is Rob Setigatpour from Stratco Property Solutions. I'm here today with my partner, Mitch Flaherty from B6 Real Estate Advisors. Our guest today is David Goldfisher, a leading landlord tenant attorney in New York City. Today we're going to be discussing various topics affecting the lease negotiations, renegotiations, leasing strategies on New York City matters affecting both free market, predominantly free market tenants. Mitch, if you could share with us some insights on as far as vacancy rates and why this is a point of concern in today's market. And then if you could lead the conversation with Dave.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Rob. Good to be here. So yeah, obviously vacancy is a very big topic at the moment. It's one that's catching the headlines. I think I saw on CNBC the other day, there's 13,000 vacant apartments in New York, in Manhattan right now, sorry. So a lot of challenges I'm seeing with buyers is that they don't know what vacancy to underwrite when looking to acquire buildings. I also spoke to our debt broker yesterday, and banks finding it difficult, again, what to use as a vacancy rate. Historically, they've used 3%. Now they're shifting more to a 5%, and they're definitely not projecting any rent growth. In some cases, some rent declines, and landlords, depending where you are in the city and the quality of the building, offering rent reductions and just consolidating and trying to find qualified tenants. David, I'm interested in your thoughts on this and what you've been seeing in this regard.
Yeah, so first off, thanks, Rob and Mitch, for having me here today. Yeah, the state of the rental market is it's really in a state of flux right now. We're all aware of the vacancy rates and what's been going on in the rental market as a whole. I've personally been seeing a dramatic shift in the ideological mindset as it relates to landlords. At the outset of this pandemic, you saw many landlords taking hard stances against tenants that were trying to retrade and renegotiate their existing leases. Over the last couple of months, I've seen that stance soften quite a bit. And now we're seeing a lot more landlords being open to renegotiate and amend existing lease terms in order to keep their tenants in place and, keep that vacancy rate at a minimum.
Okay, cool. Moving on to the next topic, so risks for landlords relying on the legal process. What are you seeing in relation to legal cases and the housing courts? What's the latest on that front?
Yeah, well, we all know what the state of housing court is right now in New York City, especially as it relates to evictions, which are essentially on hold for the foreseeable future. So I think that this state of the housing court really plays into what I just mentioned, a couple seconds ago about why landlords are more open to deal and negotiate with tenants right now, because they know that the typical avenues that we've used in the past, i.e. the legal avenues to remove a tenant or to enforce leases, aren't as accessible as they were in the past. So I think that shift really plays into what we're seeing now as far as lease negotiations are concerned.
Okay, great, thank you. And is there any potential future legislation that may help landlords recover any loss of rent during the COVID pandemic?
Well, there was a rent bill a couple of weeks ago. There was a program where tenants could apply, certain tenants that fell under a certain financial threshold for the AMI, the area median income for that household. They had a 3-week window to apply for a rent relief, and the city would pay a subsidy directly to the landlord. So that program ended in early August, the first week of August. We have yet to see the statistics as to how many people got approved for it, how much money actually went into the landlord's pockets. There are a number of legislative bills that are just sitting, in the state assembly and the city council that have yet to be signed into law. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next couple of months if further relief is passed, and not just for landlords, but for tenants as well.
Okay. Another interesting thing I heard a few months ago is in relation to security deposits, tenants using security deposits for rent. What's the latest in relation to security deposits?
Yes, that's another hot topic. Of course, we all know about Governor Cuomo's executive order from a couple of months ago, where he stated that tenants do have the opportunity to provide their landlord with a security deposit to use in lieu of rent. Now, a popular question that I've been asked is, part of this mandate by Governor Cuomo was that the tenant has to begin to repay the deposit within 90 days of using it for rent, in even monthly increments over a 12-month period. So they have to pay a 12th back over the next year. The question I get asked all the time is, how do we handle a tenant who's going to be leaving in the next 3-4 months regardless? And oftentimes there's no real answer here, and the landlord is unfortunately left holding the bag with no deposit on hand for a tenant who's vacating an apartment and might leave damages behind. So it's a major issue.
Okay, yeah, that leads nicely on to the next topic actually in terms of subleases and lease breaches. So obviously a lot of people, as everyone knows, are leaving the city right now. What's happening if a tenant's not able to comply with their lease? And are you seeing many tenants sublease their apartments as they vacate the city?
Yes, I really see two primary avenues in order to remedy a situation where a tenant is looking to breach a lease and get out of an existing lease contract. Number one, as you just mentioned, subleases is a very popular thing that's going on right now. Many tenants are putting up their apartments for sublease. They're going to cover the brokerage fee. We're seeing many tenants even offer a month free for the incoming subtenant. So there's a lot of that going on right now. We're even seeing prime tenants offer the subtenant to pay the difference in rent from what they were paying under their initial lease. So yeah, subleasing is obviously a very popular thing that's going on right now as it relates to existing rentals. We're also seeing a lot of tenants offer their landlords lump sum payments in exchange for a release from their existing contract. For example, if a tenant has another 8 months left on their lease, we're seeing them offer their landlords, say 4 or 5 months, in order to get that release. And I have seen a number of landlords actually agree to that.
So I have a question on the subleasing. We've heard circumstances where some landlords or some tenants are able to break their lease with a 2-month penalty. And then you're mentioning the illustration where some landlords are not allowing a break of the lease, and they're looking for to sublease their unit. So is there consistency across the city as far as what landlords are doing? Or what the general practice is with buildings, or is it really building by building?
So it's a good question. So, I mean, the landlords that had already built into the lease contracts pre-COVID termination clauses, these penalties, these 3-4 month penalties for breaching a lease, those landlords are obviously ahead of the game now because they gave the tenant notice about it. The tenant's well aware of what it would take to break the lease. However, a lot of landlords, didn't have such clauses. They weren't as popular as they're becoming now. So I'm seeing landlords be more willing to sublease their apartment as opposed to taking a lump sum payment now. And again, these lump sum payments, they're not typically going to be, 1 month. They're going to be 4 or 5. I've seen even 6 months. So a lot of times these upfront payments can be quite significant, and tenants would rather oftentimes go the subleasing route and cover the the fees that come along with it.
Got it. Thank you.
Moving on to the last topic in terms, I know we briefly touched on it in the state of the rental market, but I've got a lot of friends who are getting new leases in the West Village with very, very good discounted rates. They're very happy about it. Have there been any changes in terms of new leases and what's in the leases to protect landlords and tenants?
Yeah, so as far as leases themselves are concerned, we're seeing a lot of new clauses being built into these leases, and also just the entire way that both landlord and tenant approach these leases. All the negotiations are very new. We're seeing a lot more negotiations as it relates to terminations. We're seeing landlords offer 2, 3, I've seen even 4-year options to renew at flat rates, which is something that was unheard of in the past. So yeah, I think the way that both landlords and tenants approach lease negotiations right now is totally different than what it was in the past. And we're seeing a lot new clauses, like I mentioned, different termination clauses, opt-in or opt-out clauses. Those things are also being built into these lease agreements on a regular basis now.
Great.
So, Mitch, I have a question here. Dave, are you discussing predominantly free market units? Are you discussing office, retail? What's the product class that you're referring to here?
Predominantly free market, but also a lot of these ideas and these concepts apply to what's going on in the commercial market as well now. But for the most part, this is relating to free market leases. But again, a lot of these ideas are carrying over to the commercial aspect as well. And we're seeing a lot of similarities, more similarities than we have in the past, actually.
Okay, and then can you expand more as far as best practices, as far as what you're seeing is what landlords are doing, not necessarily on marketing their units, but as far as the path to execution on having the tenant sign, but also having an agreement that's tenant friendly where it won't necessarily cause a lot of resistance in execution.
Yeah, so my big recommendation to both my landlord and tenant clients is always, especially now, that communication is really key. it's essential. And, you know, both parties have a common goal and they each crave flexibility. I think that the events of the last few months have sort of ingrained us to expect the unexpected. And I think that's something that both parties, you know, want. So as long as we can maintain a level of flexibility, try to understand the other party needs that flexibility, needs to be expect the unexpected, see what we can do here. What happens if this event comes up? How do we protect ourselves in this situation? And I think that if we communicate that and articulate that to each side, I think that both parties can come away happy.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. We really appreciate your time. It's really good insights there on what's happening in the landlord-tenant relationships. And thanks, Rob, as always. We'll have another webinar again next week, and I'll circulate our details if anyone wants to reach out and keep in touch. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks for having me.